Hello and welcome to another episode of the Spartan Scoop. Today, we're going to do a quick deep dive into another one of those career competencies. We'll be talking about communication. This one is a foundational skill that shows up in every career from healthcare to business to the arts. As always, my name is Krista Koch, and I'll be your host for this episode. Today, you'll hear my conversation with Dalen, our internship coordinator here in Career Services, as we unpack what strong communication looks like in the workplace and talk about how you can start building this skill right now. Let's jump in. Thank you for joining me to talk a little bit about communication and how that shows up in the workplace. We'll start with just introduce yourself a little bit. Tell us who you are and what you do on the Career Services team.
I'm Dalen. I am the campus internship coordinator for the College of Liberal Arts and Business and the College of Health and Sciences. So that means I help you looking for your required internship for your major or minor, and then also processing the paperwork in order to get that internship approved.
Awesome. So yeah, Dalen spends a lot of time thinking about internships and how those work. And so she's a great person to talk a little bit about this particular NACE competency. So we'll jump right in. When we talk about communication in the workplace, what are we really getting at? It seems really obvious, but why is this such a big deal to employers?
So I think communication is a really important tool for influence and growth. It's a way that you can influence the company in an interview to believe in you and believe in you as a candidate and also as an employee if you do get hired. It's also a way for you to influence your own growth, asking questions, and becoming a better version of yourself. And then also a way for you to potentially help the company grow as well. All of that can be done through very strategic communication.
I think what you hit on there is that there is perhaps a difference in being good at communication in college versus being good at communication in the workplace, right? In college, it's very much about making sure that you're proactive and reaching out to your professors and things like that. In the workplace, it's going to be different. You're communicating with a lot of times with peers that you're working with or with supervisors, things like that. So it shows up in different ways, written, verbal, nonverbal. How does that look? How does a student need to think about how to be good at all those different ways to communicate?
Yeah, there's a lot of different ways, and some people are better at one way versus the other. So you really have to kind of fine tune all those different categories of communication. With written communication, I think about emails, letters, press releases, any kind of like guides or instructions that you might have to put together in your job. And then verbal, whether you're talking over the phone or in person, even those two things are much different, even though they're both technically verbal. And then nonverbal is something that other people don't think about sometimes, but your body language shows how professional you are or aren't. And it also is a way to communicate just different things on the job and a way to leave impressions, whether they're good or bad. So you really have to practice all these different kinds of communications and be able to flex them different situations.
Yeah, so it shows up in a lot of different ways, and so much professional communication nowadays is through email, right? So that written part is going to be really important. Can you give the listeners an example of what strong communication might look like in an entry level role or an internship? If somebody is in an internship and they're a particularly good communicator, what does that look like?
I think the biggest thing is asking questions and articulating those questions in a professional way that shows that you're curious and wanting to learn more, but also confident in yourself enough to ask questions. It's almost worse to not ask questions. So, being comfortable enough to ask questions is a big way to communicate effectively. And then also just being sure that you're communicating clearly, whether it's over the phone, in person, or over email. I think a lot of young students or early grads struggle to kind of code switch into that professional setting and communicate in a way that's clear that your colleagues who maybe are at different phases in their career would understand differently than like if you were just talking to a peer. So being able to communicate to your audience in a way that they understand depending on who they are.
Yeah, I think you really hit on one of the big pitfalls that I see, right? Is that failure to code switch, like you said. Professional communication in the workplace often looks very different from how somebody might communicate with family or with friends. And so being mindful of that is important. We've talked a little bit about what it looks like in the workplace. Are there any other kind of pitfalls that you can see? So failure to code switch is one. Anything else that you see students struggle with, especially when you're working with them to look for internships?
Yeah, I think just a lack of professionalism, communication is one of the skills that could really expose that pitfall that you might have. You really have to use your communication in a way that shows your professionalism and doesn't show any lack of professionalism. And a lot of times when students are struggling to get internships and they're not emailing me professionally, that's usually a good indicator of why their internship search isn't being as successful.
That's something that's important too, right? In career services, we will always go the extra mile and try to help the student out. So if we get an email that is not very professional, we will still work with the student. We'll reach out and we'll try to help kind of develop and grow that. But a recruiter is probably not going to put in that amount of time to try and teach somebody how to communicate professionally. If they get an email or an application that isn't very professional, they'll just move on.
It doesn't look like you care too much about the job if you're not communicating about it professionally as well.
Yeah, so that first impression is important, right? They expect that if you're serious about the job, you'll put a little bit of work into the way that you're communicating as well. If anybody is listening to this and they're thinking, "Oh my gosh, I don't know if I am professional or not," I would say definitely come and see us at Career Services. We can help with that. We really like helping students polish up their written and their verbal communications with employers. That takes us nicely into the next section here, how to build this skill, right? So if a student comes to you, Dalen, and they say, I'm just not a good communicator, I need some help, what do you tell them? How do you help them?
First, I would think that you're talking to me, so you're communicating enough to express that maybe potential weakness to me. So that shows that you're already on the right path. If I'm understanding that you feel like you need help, then you're clearly communicating something right. And then there's just always ways to improve that. I think a lot of college students would benefit from planning how they're gonna communicate in certain situations versus just winging it. Planning, practicing for an interview, or just sitting a little bit longer with your email draft before sending it can go a long way. And just slowing down a lot is going to make all the difference. And we can talk about what that maybe would look like. And I can go through that thought process with you. But also just remembering that you're having a conversation. Most people know how to do that. So taking the pressure off and being yourself, but of course still being professional, it's gonna help you kind of get rid of those nerves and it's just gonna go a lot smoother.
I love your advice to sit a little bit longer with an email. I have a terrible habit of sending an email and then proofreading it after I've sent it, and trying to be better about that because there's a lot of times where I'll catch something and I really wish I would have proofread the email before I hit send. So yeah, slowing down a little bit is key. If somebody wants to develop this communication skill, all right, say an AU student wants to develop the skill, are there some activities or experiences at AU that can be particularly useful in helping this skill?
Yeah, first, there's a lot of resources. So, career service, of course, but then also academic support center can help strengthen kind of a different kind of communication. So, academic writing, presentation skills, they can definitely help with. And then I was an English major, so of course, I'm going to plug any English classes are a great way to learn how to communicate. And then also just other activities would be student organizations. You communicate with peers, you send emails, coordinate things that all requires communication. Sports, you're communicating with team members, coaches, opponents, lots of people there. And then also on campus jobs, I think are one of the most effective ways because you're getting to know a lot of professionals because you're working with staff or faculty or both. You're answering phone calls potentially from people within and outside of the university. So, all of those resources and activities are ways to practice those skills, and all of them take place with individuals who are most likely student facing and are going to be a little bit more patient with you than after you graduate. So it's good to take advantage of those now.
Great, yeah, while you're in college, right, everybody is here to help you, so definitely take advantage of that while you're here. I think athletics is great as well, right? Being any kind of thing where you're on a team is gonna help with communication skills too, in addition to all those things you listed. Last few questions here. When employers say that they want strong communication skills, in your experience as somebody who helps students get internships, what are employers actually looking for when they say that?
I think a lot of them want confidence. They want to see that you believe in yourself. That kind of makes them believe in you a little bit more. And also just respect, understanding who authority figures are and how to be professional in those settings and communicate clearly. And again, I'm going to always talk about just being clear, understanding your audience, not talking to recruiters or supervisors in the same way that you talk to peers. I think they also want to see curiosity. So, again, asking questions confidently.
So if a student wants to demonstrate this skill, right, they've taken advantage of all those resources and they've gotten good at communicating, how can they prove that they have this competency in an interview or on a resume?
The biggest thing is how you frame the experience that you have, wording it in a way that is action oriented, starting with an action verb, or if you're on your resume, or if you're in an interview, really having the action and the task that you did as the focus of that answer, and then ending with the impact or the result of that, either in a resume bullet point or at the end of your interview response. That's a good formula for making sure you stay on track and actually answer the question or actually demonstrate the skill that you have.
Oftentimes it's really easy to focus on the task or the action and then people forget the impact or the result, right? And so you have to kind of close the loop on that. I feel like I keep saying this, but this is also something that career services can help with, right? So if you're struggling with your resume or how to answer a question in an interview in a way that kind of fits this mold that Dalen just talked about, we can help you with that as well in career services. All right, Dalen, any final advice for students who want to level up their communication skills?
Yeah, again, plugging any communication classes, public speaking, business communication, or any English class or any class that involves a lot of writing, talking to faculty and staff. You meet with your advisor, everyone's required to, so that's a good chance to brush up on those communication skills, meeting with any of those resources I talked about. But then also, something I haven't talked about would be using AI. You can use ChatGPT to practice interview responses or potentially elevate resume bullet points, and it's kind of a way to it's a little bit more low risk than talking to a human. You can practice things, see what kind of response the AI might give you or what suggestions it may have for you, and that's something that you can do on your own or with the help of someone else. So it's a pretty accessible way to brush up on those skills and see where you're at.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Dalen, for spending some time and talking to us about communication. I appreciate it.
Yep, thank you.